Hey everybody, welcome to Outlier on Air, the podcast where we interview founders, disruptors, and mavens. As always, I'm your host, Ever Gonzalez. On today's episode, we have Zachary Davis. He is the producer of HarvardX and the host of Ministry of Ideas. Zachary, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
We're excited to have you. We're doing this in person, right? Most of my shows are via Skype or, some sort of a Zoom, things like that. You're here in studio. Here we are at Dixie State University. They've been kind enough to lend us their studio, and so I'm excited to have you here.
Thanks.
You're a hometown boy.
I am a hometown. I actually took some classes here at Dixie State when I was in high school, and so it's bringing back a lot of memories. I even took the ACT here. So
Oh, did you really?
I remember being so nervous that day.
And now look at you now. All right, let's talk about it. I want to paint the picture, right? So you're doing a lot of cool stuff with podcasting, with education. You have a conference coming up that you're starting. It's you're focusing on a lot of cool stuff that I think is going to be interesting to a lot of our listeners. So let's just paint the picture for now. Like we mentioned, hometown boy, St. George, Utah, born and raised, right? You're in Boston now. Let's talk about the journey. What was it like growing up in St. George?
So my dad was a doctor, and he did medical school and his residency in the South. So I was actually from 6 to 12, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and North Carolina. And, it was nice to be exposed to kind of different way of life out there. And then, but my dad wanted a safe, good environment for his LDS family. So we moved to St. George, Utah. And I remember we moved in mid-August.
The worst time to do it.
Driving up with the U-Haul.
110 degrees.
Stepped out onto the sidewalk. I was just burning my feet. But I went to the 6th grade center here and went to Dixie Middle and Dixie High. Had a really amazing experience. Loved it. I played a lot of sports. I played down at the river and built forts. But the biggest thing that kind of got me started on a more academic track is I got involved in something called the Academic Decathlon. And I mean, unexpectedly, I ended up being really, really good and ended up winning the whole region. And it kind of proved that, wow, like you can do some interesting things with your mind. So I ended up going to BYU and went on a mission to Spain. And while I was in Spain, I encountered a lot of poverty.
So the LDS mission, Mormon mission, 2 years, right? You go out and basically you're knocking on doors, talking about the gospel and sharing religion and obviously serving the people in Spain. 2 years.
That's
away
right.
from family at what, 19, right?
That's right, at 19. And so I was in southern Spain in cities like Malaga and Granada. And we would go around knocking on these doors in these big apartment buildings. And a lot of these were in lower income places. And I remember knocking on one door, opening it up, and there were about 25 Ecuadorians living in a 2-bedroom apartment. And I got to know, these people, and they explained how they were here trying to earn money to send back home. And I got really interested in, like, how desperate they must be to come and live like this. And I really decided to dedicate myself to international development. How can I help people come out of poverty and empower themselves and have better communities? So when I went back to BYU after my mission, I studied international development. I studied economics. I studied political science. And I was really trying to figure out how do countries emerge from poverty.
And so it's been kind of a wild ride, right? I mean, from where you're coming from to living in Spain for a while, I'm assuming that we can spend an entire episode just talking about your experiences in Spain, I'm assuming. You were there, came back to BYU in northern Utah. What was it like coming home to BYU, right? Provo, Utah, very normal, very safe, very, dare I say, vanilla type of existence for a little while. What was that like?
Yeah, I think that's true. I remember feeling annoyed at maybe the homogenous or complacent attitude of people in the face of a world that I knew was suffering.
Was out there, yeah.
And so I ended up doing a lot of study abroads to leave and like go out and counter. So I I went and studied childhood mortality and maternal health in rural Bolivia. And I went up to some of these places that had literally never seen a white person, like way up in the Andes. I remember showing them a camera, and like it was this magical creation. And I did some research into human trafficking in India. And basically, I kept learning that giving aid money wasn't enough for these communities. What was really needed was education. And so I got really interested in the problem of international education. How do you help people get access to the best quality education, even when their communities don't have the resources to do it? And so that really, I think, led me to my interest in working at some place like HarvardX, which provides free online education to anyone in the world from the most highly trained
Sure.
world-class teachers. And to me, that remains core to my mission. It's how do you empower people through ideas and knowledge?
Well, it's one of those things, right? I mean, the U.S. is the perfect example. We can move up the system for the most part via education, right? I mean, I don't care where you were born in the U.S., right? The lowest income type of communities, education is going to get you out of that a lot faster, in my opinion, than anything else for the most part. So why not try it with other countries, right? And so there are a lot of boots on the ground. There are a lot of different groups, government groups, private groups, trying to do this all over the world. Some of them work, some don't. Why? With your experience, there's a lot of time and money and resources wasted in some of these different programs. Why do some take hold and others don't?
Yeah, I have a friend actually who works for an organization that was hired by the government of Liberia to come and take over their entire education system because they would have teachers who just wouldn't show up. So they would take their salary, they just wouldn't show up, and there weren't textbooks. It's a complex issue, but really you need an empowered middle class to have the time and resources to invest in their children's education, so that they have those periods, those years to spend apart from the economy learning.
Sure.
So it's complex systems of economy, political will, and community values.
From BYU, you spent some time. Remind me where you.
So after graduating with 2 degrees, I majored in international relations and humanities, and so my first job out of college was a fellowship in D.C. at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and I was involved in the democracy program, looking at how countries become more democratic. So I was there a year, and it was an amazing experience. D.C. is so stimulating and full of fascinating people, beautiful city. But I started to feel dissatisfied with politics.
Like most of us?
Like most of us. What made me skeptical is that people were aligned by tribes, political tribes, and very combative. But even worse, that this idea that you could work decades for some kind of policy that you hope will happen, and then if your side loses an election, everything you've worked for is dashed or removed, and that's not a reason not to keep fighting. You have to keep battling for what's right. But I wanted to try to figure out a way to live a life where no matter what happens externally, what I'm doing has meaning. In other words, I started to think, how can I become more of an educator than a policymaker? So I had fallen in love with a young woman from Ukraine named Maria in D.C., and so we moved out to Ukraine, and I was there for a year and a half, and it gave me time to think apart from like the rat race of America.
Sure.
And so I really started thinking about, could I combine technology with education in some interesting way? And it was 2010. Facebook's power was continuing to be shown, and how it can connect people. And so I eventually came up with the idea of a a platform, an educational platform that would help people learn about the humanities in exciting and amazing ways. So I wanted to create a startup, an educational startup. And I learned all that I could about the startup world and venture funding and this whole exciting sphere. And so when we decided to come back to the U.S., I was trying to decide, well, where do we go? Silicon Valley? Mm-hmm. Well, maybe, but where's some place where it's strong in tech and education? So we came to Boston.
Which makes sense.
Yep, came to Boston. And I enrolled in a startup boot camp called the Boston Startup School. And I went there, and it was a really great program. But after 2 days, it was pretty obvious to me that it was more for business type people, and I was really more of a scholar type person. So I ended up going to this class that was being offered at Harvard on digital humanities. And the professor was really amazing, this guy named Jeffrey Schnapp, kind of a leader in the field. And after the class period, I'm like, hey, is there anything you ever need help on? He's like, funny you ask. I actually am looking for a producer. Can you start tomorrow?
Oh, really? That quick?
So I left this startup boot camp and started working for him with his center. And that kind of introduced me to this whole world of digital humanities where you have faculty and scholars partnering with tech experts and builders to design digital experiences to amplify education.
So it's kind of the best of both worlds at this point.
Yeah.
And so that was your starting point.
That was my starting point.
You're still involved with Harvard, right? You're still there. You're still helping with that piece of the education, the technology, the getting out there and trying to help as many people as possible through HarvardX.
That's right. So after 6 months of working at that Digital Humanities Center, a friend said, hey, Harvard's starting a new group that's going to be making free online courses. You'd be perfect for that. So I ended up getting hired. I was like the first person they hired. And I've been there for 5 years now. And our mission is to radically expand access to high quality education around the world. So I'm a producer, so I work with faculty to take some of what they do in the classroom and really make it even better in an online format.
Before, I mean, it was pretty dull, bad quality, which is amazing for a place like Harvard, and not just Harvard, MIT I've seen the same things there. It was pretty bad. I mean, it was a camcorder or something in the back of the room. You had students kind of coughing and making noise, and then just the audio part of it was not very exciting. So you've come in there and you've kind of cleaned it up, and you've brought new ideas to this. What's it like now?
Yeah, that's right. It was really bad. It was really boring.
I mean, great content.
It was great content, but it
not a good package.
It wasn't meant for online consumption, really. So what we tried to do is start with the premise: what can we actually do better in an online version, and not just this kind of poor substitute? And so we started integrating ideas from documentary film, close-ups, tight scripted material. Working with animation, working with interactive timelines, trying to make it as interactive as possible. So it's not just this passive consumption, but that students are brought into the material. And so I had a lot of fun, and still continue to have fun, designing these learning experiences to be as magnetic and powerful as possible.
When you're in the middle of all of this, right? I mean, you're still enjoying it. It's still challenging. You're still passionate about this. Then here comes along this new idea, Ministry of Ideas, the podcast, right? I mean, it's been a little bit of a process. Let's talk about when it first started, how it started, the players involved now as well.
So after a few years of working at HarvardX and being behind the camera, I started thinking, I wonder if I can use some of these new media skills I'm developing to do my own creative project. And I started listening to podcasts and started, immediately realizing these are powerful mediums for transmitting knowledge. And I'm surrounded by these amazing scholars who I'm working with. I should start an interview show. And so I thought about doing that, but I really didn't want to start a show without some kind of audience already built in, because I didn't want it to just be my mom and some friends for pity.
Yeah. Which is the way it usually starts, by the way. Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with starting small. But I, given how busy I was, I really wanted to find some kind of partnership. So eventually I started reaching out to some local media groups in Boston, Boston Magazine and the Boston Globe. And Boston Globe said, hey, we've been wanting to do a show like this for a long time. Nice. We just didn't have kind of the bandwidth. Let's do something together. But what they said is, we want you to do something better than an interview show. We want you to do something produced. And I didn't actually know what they meant by that. But what they meant was to make it kind of like high quality NPR style shows,
which takes a lot of time, a lot of talent, right? A lot of people involved for the most part.
Totally.
An interview show, you can just click on the record button like we just did today and just have a conversation. This was a bigger commitment. Did that scare you a little bit?
It did. I mean, I didn't think I had time to do this, but I was so excited about trying to grow and to learn something new that I dived in. And I ended up finding some collaborators, which without these collaborators, I wouldn't have been able to do anything. So essentially, the first step was trying to build a team, trying to convince people on a vision. And so I found some really great people, who had backgrounds in radio, who were working at some of the best Boston radio stations. Once we put together a team, we really had the pieces in place to create a show that we could be proud of. And initially I was going to call the show Ideology with an A. And luckily my Globe editor's like, that's a terrible name. Like, what are you really trying to do here? I said, well, I mean, it's kind of like a religious ministry to me. I want to help people have access to ideas that can change their lives. They're like, well, why don't you call it Ministry of Ideas? I'm like, that's exactly what I should call it.
Great name, by the way.
Yeah,
I love
thanks.
that name.
So the name is perfect for what we're doing, which is helping people understand where ideas come from, how they've changed, and how we might think differently about our world today. Yeah,
the description, a podcast dedicated to investigating and illuminating the ideas that shape our society. That's heavy.
Yeah, it's serious stuff, but we try to make it as interesting and fun as possible.
So now you're in your second season, each season about 10 episodes or so. What has the response been from those that are basically from the community in Boston, globally too? I mean, this is a show that's taken off quite a bit.
Yeah, we've been surprised. We knew it's a niche show. It's for people who are interested in history and culture. But the response has been really strong. So almost, immediately we started getting some media attention. BuzzFeed put us on a list of best podcasts of 2018. The Guardian newspaper in the UK wrote about us, saying that we were simply the best podcast out there. And our audience has grown from, a few hundred listeners for our first episode to now, we're getting 30,000 listeners a month. So the growth has been really fantastic. And most exciting, we've gotten new partnerships. And one of those is where I work, Harvard. Harvard Divinity School, where I'm a graduate student, said, hey, we really like what you're doing. We like how you're trying to bring in concepts of religion and make it accessible to people. Why don't we sponsor you? Why don't you come and become an initiative of the school?
And you're like, yes, for sure.
I'm like, absolutely, absolutely. There's so many ways in which our vision aligns, and so much that I appreciate about having access to faculty, graduate students, and helping to reach the people that are already interested in what Harvard's doing.
We were kind of introduced by a mutual friend. So you reached out online and we connected, and we had the St. George connection, and the love for podcasting. So when you came into town, we had lunch yesterday or the day before, and we were just kind of talking about this whole thing and things that you were interested in, things that I was interested in. And in my mind, I'm thinking he's asking for advice or looking to talk about building your own personal empire. So that's how I went into this. And after a little while, you were like, well, hold up a little bit. I'm not trying to go out on my own and build this whole thing. I want to stay in this forum and this, create this platform with the Harvards and the Boston Globe and those type of groups, where in my mind, I'm already thinking entrepreneurship route for sure, right? Eventually, you're going to want to break away and do your own thing, but that's not the goal. What's the goal of the podcast, of this platform that you're already building with these partners?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, so I think I mentioned that I had that startup idea, and pretty quickly I realized like I actually am not interested in the business part of startups.
That's funny.
I always was really interested in the ideas themselves. And so realizing that and realizing that I'd rather somebody else take care of accounting and payroll and marketing, I want to be creating. So being at Harvard helps me focus more on creating, more on teaching than on logistics and branding and things like this.
I think we talked about this during lunch. We have 400 plus episodes on our show, so we've interviewed entrepreneurs, very successful ones that are in the middle, ones that are just starting, and it's funny the story is the same, right? They do something that they're passionate about, something that they love, that they're great at, and then it starts to get traction, and the company starts to grow, and then they're kind of pulled in a lot of different directions with accounting, with sales, with all this other stuff that they don't necessarily want to do or are not good at, and so the creativity part of it starts to, it's not as good anymore. And so luckily you figured this out early on saying, I don't want to do this. Let me focus on my art. It is an art. You're a storyteller, a very good one at that.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's right.
And so you want to keep it that way.
Yeah, that's right. If I could be creating episodes for most of my time for the rest of my life, I'd be happy.
For the rest of your life, right? Because one of the questions that I always ask on my interview shows is, right, what's 5 years going to look like? And everybody has different answers and things like that. But in 5 years, you're going to be okay doing this, right? Obviously for a bigger audience, but this would be okay.
Yeah, I think I found my passion.
Okay, let's talk about the podcast specifically, right? We talked about how it's educational, but religion plays a big part of this.
Yeah.
Being raised in a devout Mormon household, right, in a home, LDS, right, Latter-day Saints. What is, and I'm trying to figure out a way to ask this delicately, what is what you're doing now with the show, living in Boston, right, traveling the world, what has that done for a St. George boy with his religion at this point in his life?
Yeah, so, growing up in a Mormon home, you are asked to give talks at church. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, I'm continuing to give talks. I'm just doing it through podcast. In my 20s and after my mission and starting to read and study more, my faith became more nuanced. And I came to realize that not everything that I was taught is kind of literally true in the way that I thought it was. And that's a challenging thing to confront, that that your worldview is more complicated than you expected. But I never lost sight of the good things that religion had done for me, my family, my culture. And I was really interested in what the social role of religion is. And so in some way, the show is really interested in the ways in which religion continues to play a role in society, even though we often won't talk about it publicly. It's kind of kept in a private sphere, but it still impinges on what's going on. And so, for example, one of our episodes is trying to explain this mystery to a lot of my liberal friends in Boston. Why would conservative evangelical Christians support someone who's so unchristian like Donald Trump? Mm-hmm. How does that make any sense? And so we did an episode about, well, if you realize their visions of the apocalypse, it helps to explain this, because they think what's really important right now is that the U.S. supports Israel, supports the embassy move. Trump was the only person publicly saying, I will move the embassy to Jerusalem. And so suddenly what seems really mysterious starts to make more sense. Like, well, they're less concerned about personal behavior, more concerned about policies that are going to support their vision of the end times. So that's one example. We also look at things like, our fitness gyms, religious-like cults. I mean, there's a group in Boston, in many cities called Soul Cycle.
For sure.
And Soul Cycle, if you look at their branding and their advertising, I mean, this is a straight-out religious cult. And, it doesn't mean it's bad, mm-hmm. but you have to be aware of these are patterns of life that people have been living for many, many years. And now it's being promoted by a corporation, a fitness corporation. It's really fascinating.
Sure. You know, I'm LDS too. I'm Mormon. I think I talked about this on my show a little bit. Raised in Southern California, now here in Utah. We've been here for 11 years or so, right? And Utah being kind of the mecca for Mormonism, right? I struggled with my faith a little bit when my wife and I moved out here. We'd been married for a couple of years, right? We moved out here, and not a couple of years, 6 years or so. We moved out here, and we struggled with our faith and our being active in the community or a church in our wards and serving, just because the difference between the cultures, right? The religion was the same, the beliefs were the same, but it's different cultures, right? And we felt, at least I felt, like almost like a social tool without a use, right? To quote a song from way back. I didn't know what to do with myself. In California, I led a youth group, and I taught seminary, and I taught Sunday school. And then coming up here, which is great, everybody has responsibilities, and everybody's taking care of all of those responsibilities, and I didn't know what to do with myself. And that was the first time that I started not necessarily doubting, but certainly I took a hit with the things that I felt and the things that I thought I knew about myself, about my religion. Again, you being out in Boston, has anything affected your life, your belief system, positively, negatively, to this point?
So I probably belong to the most liberal congregation
For sure.
in the church. I'm in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
I can assume that, yeah.
And so for someone like me, it's actually a great place because you can believe a wide range of things and still be fully embraced in that congregation. I feel bad for people who maybe have different viewpoints, who live in more, conservative or
Sure.
homogenous places. But I think what's important to recognize is it's really up to us to create our religious experience. I mean, there's constraints on what your community is, like, but I mean, Mormonism is not one thing. Christianity is not one thing. Islam is not one thing. There is so much diversity in every single religious group. So part of it is finding,
And that's good.
Yeah,
I love that thing. Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. So part of it is finding the way you want to live your religion and looking for people who also believe that way and supporting one another, and recognize that religions do change. Like Mormonism has changed a lot in 100 years. It will continue to change. And so being frustrated with how it is and then leaving, I think isn't as good as finding ways to try to change it in a positive direction.
Let's talk about the role, and we kind of hit on it a little bit with Trump, but let's talk about the role that religion and education have in today's society, right? I think, and you tell me if I'm I think it feels like religion is on the decline, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it feels like
absolutely,
as far
absolutely.
as not just with Mormons, but I think worldwide, there are less normal religious people, I'm assuming, right? The typical going to church on Sundays, those type of things. And then education, does that play a part in society today, in good or bad?
Yeah. Well, it's first important to note religion is declining in Europe and America, but elsewhere it's growing.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
So South America growing?
That's right.
Mhm.
So mostly what we're seeing is kind of Europe and North America. Religious participation has been declining for a long time. It was really declining in Europe, and America for a while resisted some of that decline. But millennials today are really leaving organized religion pretty rapidly.
And is that because of education?
So this is one of the most complicated questions in history, is the story of secularization, and happens to be one of the things that I study. It's not as simple as education, but that's a part of it. One cause that people point to is that in a plural society where people can believe many things, it's, well, I don't know if that's true actually. I mean, America was pluralistic for a while and maintained belief. But some people say it's harder to believe when there's many other religions around you, because including, agnosticism or atheism, because you just basically can pick a lifestyle. So I think here's what I would argue. When religion is seen as a way of life, a culture, it's often easier to just participate in that culture because it's less about mentally assenting to things and more like, practices and
that's
patterns.
one of the things that we struggle with, right? The culture here was a lot different than the culture in Southern California. It felt like we had to fight for our religion in LA as opposed to here. We were way too comfortable. We were just kind of going through the motions because it's a culture.
Yeah, that's right. So, and there is no doubt that new scientific knowledge and understanding, beginning with, Copernicus and Galileo and Darwin, all of these things have shaken assumptions about where the world came from and possibilities of an afterlife. But I think there's a strong argument for saying that, a lot of the functions that religion once provided can be experienced in other ways. You can experience, health in the hospital rather than through prayer. You can experience pageantry and excitement at a sports event or a movie instead of, church. So a lot of these things have been like disaggregated. Sometimes in the business world, people talk about unbundling. You unbundle services. It used to be in like small towns. Church did so many different things, and many of those functions have been unbundled, and so it's not that surprising that people need it less.
So what is this going to look like in 25 years?
If trends continue, you're going to have a passionate but smaller group of Christians, a growing number of minority religions like Islam or Buddhism, and a really big group of secular agnostics and atheists who may not be opposed to religion but aren't very supportive of it.
Sure. So it's funny with the U.S. and politics in general. It feels like Christianity still has a strong hold in politics nationwide, especially in specific towns. When it's on the decline, wouldn't we see that in politics as well?
So I think the decline of Christianity is actually a big cause for our political polarization right now. Republicans are the party of white Christians. Mm-hmm. Democrats are the party of basically everyone else, including seculars. And as white Christians feel that their numbers are declining, they feel extremely threatened because they used to run the country.
For sure.
And it feels like a life and death matter. Many people think that once seculars totally win demographically, they're going to persecute Christians. They really feel this. Mm-hmm. And so some of the rancor and some of the contention is just based on like worries about your group going away.
And we've seen it throughout history, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So is this, again, 25 years from now, it can be completely different than the society for the most part that we see now. In your opinion, better or worse?
Well, maybe better and worse.
How so?
It's always hard to predict what the social impact of things will be, but I think it's clear that religion offers much more than stories of origin. It binds communities together. It prevents loneliness. It can give purpose and meaning. So I personally think religion has a very important role to play in a flourishing society. And when I look at the impact of religion's decline, I think that there are some serious problems that come from it. At the same time, one can't help but look at Europe and Scandinavia, who are very hardly religious at all, and they're doing just fine.
Sure.
So it's hard to say, but I personally think that we need to develop a healthy relationship with religion, healthy forms of religion, and healthy ways of living together as being part of different religions to be our healthiest and happiest.
Who's listening to your show because of the message that you have?
We have a lot of We have a lot of people around the world listening. I think people who are hungry for ideas that aren't just for their own sake, but they're connected to purpose or connected to meaning. And so, sometimes we describe our show as secular sermons. So if you don't go to church on Sunday, where are you going to get some kind of uplifting message? Maybe Netflix. But Ministry of Ideas tries to help you understand your world, your own ways of thinking, and how you might live a wiser, healthier life.
And so why podcasting? It could have been anything else. Why podcasting at this time?
I do believe the power of the voice is extraordinary. And I've written before, and I do enjoy writing. But there's something about asking the professor who's actually doing the exciting research to explain in her own words what she's doing and why. And then using historical sounds to bring ideas to life.
It feels more intimate, right? I mean, because it's and I can access it anytime I want for the most part, right? On demand type of listening, and it feels like I'm there. As corny as that sounds, it feels like I'm in the room.
Yeah, I really like the idea that I'm making washing dishes an enlightening experience,
or working out, or in the car, whatever. Right, for sure. I mean, that's where a lot of the podcast episodes are consumed, and it's great. It is podcasting in general as a whole. It's still in the baby stages. What else do you see with the show?
Yeah, I think you're right. And it's an exciting time because we're seeing so many experiments in form and genre and topics. And I mean, it's a big challenge, of course, because there's a billion podcasts. Why should you listen to this one? And finding an audience is hard. But I'm really excited about podcasts' potential for education. So most of my work at HarvardX is video-based. And I think there's important roles for video, but most of what we do can be done through audio because it's about ideas. And you can do it while you're doing other things, going on a walk. And so one of the things I'm interested in doing actually is creating a conference for educational podcasters called Sound Education. And I think that there are thousands and thousands of amazing educational podcasts. I started listening to one called Literature and History, and it's the history of literature from the beginning. And I have learned so much. I mean, these are amazing works of scholarship, but they're pleasurable too. And I think that's the exciting thing is that we're using techniques to make learning as exciting and pleasurable and fun as possible while still being rigorous and serious.
Well, you brought up the conference. Let's talk about it. Right? You've been doing HarvardX and now the show for a little while now. Now you're kind of moving into the conference space. That's not easy, right? I mean, let's talk about it.
Sure. So I think there's something really powerful about bringing people together. And what I can see is that there are a lot of people working on educational podcasts by themselves, and it's a lonely thing. And so the idea of bringing people together to share ideas and knowledge and also just to make friendships is something I'm really interested in. And so we're going to try to put together a conference this fall in November at Harvard campus and convene a range of speakers, people who are the best in the field with people who are just getting started, and providing a space and a community to keep refining this new medium, this educational podcast medium.
I think this was a good natural step for what you're doing. Right, we have the show again, 400 plus episodes. We also host entrepreneurial events, podcasting events. We have 200 plus under our belt as well. And as cool as podcasting is, and being able to do this with people, I envy people from all over the world basically, and it's fantastic. But it's the face-to-face meetings and conferences and events where the magic happens. Right, there's something special about being able to sit across from somebody that has a new idea or, challenging you in some different way. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's magical. And I mean, some of the best ideas I've ever gotten are in conversation. It's like when you're on the frontier of understanding something and someone sparks just that next step that you need. So I think it's really important that even those of us who are really enthusiastic about this kind of mass media of podcasts, never forget to bring people together in person.
Agreed. So what are some of the challenges that you're facing, not just with the conference, but with the podcast and the work that you do? I mean, this is not easy, right? I'm assuming not always fun. What are you seeing on a regular basis that's frustrating or an obstacle?
Well, it's always a challenge to build an audience, especially for a show that's not that easy to describe. I mean, we teach people the history of ideas. Not always clear to people what exactly that means or what to expect. So to some degree, it's always a challenge to get people to listen to at least one episode so they can know what it is and if they like it. But we face the challenge that, so many new ventures face, which is finding enough funding to really support what the hopes are. And so all of us working on the show work for a pittance, really. I mean, we're trying to raise money. We're trying to build up financial plans. But it's still very much startup phase, and struggling to make time in addition to all the other things we're all involved in.
Yeah,
so
that's always the hard
part. Sort of like garage period.
But exciting too.
Very exciting, yeah. And the people the greatest pleasure, of course, is having these collaborators that I work with, my friends that we do together, and each of us have different strengths. And it's so nice to know that something you're weak at, your partner will come in and help with the other thing.
Yeah, when it comes together and when it's a well-oiled machine, that's when it's exciting, right? Now you're at the phase where literally you're taking off. I mean, it continues to grow. You're doing some fantastic things. For me personally, I've been an entrepreneur for I feel like most of my life. And once I start, that's the fun part, right? The hustle, the being able to kind of put it together, bootstrapping. And then once it kind of gets going, I lose interest a little bit, right? Because now I'm a creator, I'm a starter, not a manager for the most part. Although Outlier has been my longest gig because I'm so passionate about it, right? I feel like every conference is a new challenge. Every new episode is a new challenge. And so I'm meeting a lot of great people. My network is growing. And it's something that I don't see. I'm not going to stop it anytime soon. It sounds like, we kind of have that similar idea of trying to do this for as long as we possibly can. Even if nobody was listening to my show, I would still be doing it. Just because of the being a selfish person, the benefits that I get personally from meeting people like you or others that I've had on the show. Again, even if nobody else was listening, I still get something out of every single show, and it just helps me be a better person, better entrepreneur, better blah blah blah. It's fantastic, and it feels like you're on the same path there.
Yeah, it's a real privilege to even work on something creative, and we've started getting letters from people, emails, talking about how much a particular episode means to them, or how much it's changed their thinking, and I mean those messages are so gratifying, and it's why we do what we do.
Having Harvard kind of backing you that can be a good thing and a bad thing. When I'm trying to go down the list of the positives, those are easy. Does being associated with Harvard bring any negatives? And it's possible that it doesn't, but just being an entrepreneur, more independent, right? We talked about this, trying to build your own empire. Though that was my instant negative. But for you that wants to be in this space with these partners, anything that's challenging with that relationship?
Not necessarily. For what I'm trying to do, Harvard's an amazing partner because they have
and a global brand.
Yeah, they have. There's so many. They give us credibility. They give us a reach, and I learn so much from my colleagues there. But you do give up some independence, and I can't, at the top of my mind, think of anything that would be off limits. But I do have kind of overseers. I don't know if that's the right word to say, but I am accountable to people in a way that I wouldn't be if I was fully independent.
Sure,
but
that can be a good thing too.
See that as I don't see that as a weakness. If anything, they're there to help make the show as good as it can be.
Okay, as we start to kind of wrap up here, let's talk about the things that you've learned in the last several years as you kind of have started on this path. Again, a challenging path, very rewarding path, but the things that you've learned, I'm assuming, can help a lot of the people that are listening to the show right now, right? We have entrepreneurs that are in the trenches building their own companies, trying to start movements, trying to do different things on their own. What can they learn from you? I mean, what's one of the takeaways that they can take from you and apply into their daily routine, their daily life?
Well, one lesson definitely is it's okay if you haven't quite yet figured exactly out what you're supposed to do. I truly was kind of stumbling around in the dark for a decade before I really realized, like, oh, I want to be creating educational media. I thought it was a startup for a little while, but it actually was more in the content that I was interested in. So don't give up, because if you're probably getting closer to where you want to be. Just keep going. The other, of course, is you can't even plan for success. It will often just come unexpectedly. I mean, we started this show and it has done so much better than we expected. And so to some degree, there's kind of an element of randomness to this, and you kind of just have to keep grinding. I mean, I really felt like a total nobody loser, for a while. I'm still a nobody, but I'm still working. I'm working towards creating something for its own sake and not for any kind of fame or prestige. And I think that's important to recognize. Do things you would do even if your audience or your recognition is small, because you really love it, and then you'll be happy.
I think people, we're savvy enough where we can smell that on those that want to be famous for the sake of being famous. We talked about, and for those that are professional speakers, I'm sorry, maybe you want to turn this down, but we don't hire any professional speakers to come speak on our stage, just because I want the people that are actually doing something, creating something, are being challenged by something to come and tell those experiences, as opposed to somebody that's well polished on our stage, right? There's a space for that and a time for that, but for me and my conferences and on my stage, I want people that are in the trenches that have a cool story to tell. And so, right, it feels like you're doing the same thing. You're not doing this for the fame. You're certainly not doing this for the money yet, right? It's one of those things that you're passionate about, and I think it comes across in the work that you do. I mean, you just spent an hour or so in the other room earlier today working on your show. I mean, and it's passion. You're supposed to be on vacation. What are you doing, right? I mean, it's one of those things that people can smell on you. And so congratulations on the success and the things that you're doing and the things that you can continue to accomplish in the next 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah, thank you.
What for those that are interested in the podcast and the event, just you in general, where can we find you online?
Ministryofideas.org, but the best place is whatever you use to listen to podcasts. Just search for Ministry of Ideas.
Fantastic. So Outliers, you can go to Outlier HQ. That's outlierhq.com. First of all, subscribe to the podcast, rate, review it, share it with your friends. But there you're going to be able to find Zach's website, podcast, conference, all that good stuff. Zach, it's been amazing having you on the show. Thank you for being part of this. We enjoy having people like you on because it challenges us. It helps us grow. And you brought the heat. So thank you. And again, congratulations for your success.
Thank you, Ever.
Outliers, we'll talk to you tomorrow.